Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and today I want to talk to you guys a little bit about learning to keep your ego in check and why it's important to do so when you are cutting body fat or trying to lose weight. So let me put on my +5 out of weaponsmithing, work on scaling up my crafting a little bit, and let's talk about this. And this is something that I personally am going through right now because I'm cutting right now. I'm down over 20 pounds at this point. Yet, as some people have noticed, you look a little bigger. It's like, no, I'm not bigger, guys. I promise you, I'm not gaining muscle. I'm not getting bigger. I've just lost a little bit of body fat. And this is a long-term strategy. And because I'm an advanced lifter, because I'm older, because I'm over 40, I definitely have to keep my ego in check when cutting. And for me personally, that has historically been problematic. It's been problematic. And there are times when we got to step back and admit that when we're doing stuff, am I going to go about this the right way, or am I going to let my ego, am I going to let my pride get in the way of achieving my goals safely and effectively? Because that's something that we sometimes have to ask ourselves. Do I want to reach a goal, or do I want to feed my ego, which is more important to me? And that's one of those cases. And for me, it's one of the things is that not being able to improve on strength, or starting to have days to where my strength is down a little bit, really messes with me when losing body fat. Historically, it's something I've learned to come to terms with now as I've gotten older and hopefully a little bit wiser. Maybe one day I'll be a truly wise man. We can all hope, can't we? Trying to get there. Getting more gray in my beard. But one of the things I have definitely learned over the years is that sometimes we have to accept that there will be stalls and even occasional regressions in performance when we are trying to cut body fat. And there are times when we have to step back and look at our goals. When you're setting goals for yourself with your training, setting goals for your performance or your physique or anything else physical, or probably anything else in life. It doesn't even have to be training related, let's be honest here. You need to have obviously your longer term goals, but your short term goals need to be broken down into bite-sized, manageable portions. And there are going to be times to where you have to step back and realize that sometimes those bite-sized portions are going to require you to focus entirely on one little goal in that microcosm, that little moment, and have to let all your other goals sit stagnant. Otherwise, you can't always get there. And in the case of this, when you're a slightly more advanced lifter, if you honestly think you're going to get bigger and stronger while you're losing body fat, you've been watching too many guys who've been upping the dose. That's not the real world. That's not reality. I'm not saying it doesn't happen on occasion. I'm not saying it can't happen on occasion with perfect, careful training in a perfect environment. Yeah, it does occasionally happen. Or people who are willing to cut body fat very, very slowly. But if you actually want to see noticeable differences week to week, or you want to see the scale actually shift a little bit week to week, you're going to have to set that sort of goal aside. And you're going to have to accept that you're going to have to be stationary for a little while on those. You're going to have to just try to hold on to the performance you have. You're going to also have to start looking at things like fatigue management, maximum recoverable volume, risk of injury. Because that's the one thing that a lot of people don't factor in. They're always like, well, I'm going to push all the time. This guy's telling people they might need to back down when they're cutting, when they're losing body fat. That's some pussy shit. I'm going to keep pushing forward. Screw that guy. That's some weak pussy mentality. How many of those guys who do that are always the guys who are snapped up, having to wear wraps, elbow sleeves, things like that when they train? They're getting snapped up, and that's something that you need to think about in terms of injury prevention. When you are consuming more food, it is easier for your body to recover from things. Recovery is not always just about the muscles performing either. Sometimes recovery has to do with your nervous system recovering. If your nervous system is under recovering and you're going and you're pushing hard sets, or you're doing grinders or sets to failures or really, really heavy lifts, and your nervous system isn't fully recovered because your maximum recoverable fatigue is lower when you're not consuming more food, what happens? Your form can degrade on those heavy lifts or on those failure reps. What happens when form degrades? It's when injuries happen. Compile that with the fact that less circulating anabolic hormones due to, again, maybe less overall food or maybe more other activity keeping those things further in check. Connective tissue Doesn't connective tissue have a hormonal anabolic component to it? Your connective tissue might be recovering a hair slower. Right? Certain things in your body you're not going to want to add tissue and hypertrophy, because connective tissue does hypertrophy from training, right? Doesn't bone hypertrophy to some extent from training? Doesn't it get denser? A lot of that comes from food you eat. Your nutrition affects all those things. All right, so if you are not getting the recovery, and the recovery usually involves an adaptation to that thing, a structural change of some type is part of the recovery process, is it not? That's why we change. If all of that is regressed a little bit because of the food and the energy in-out equation, those things might be recovering a hair slower. You start combining that with sloppy technique, form breaking down to your nervous system being fatigued and not recovering. What happens? You're going to have a higher injury rate. So the question I'm going to ask you, how fast do you think you're going to lose muscle, or is it going to interfere with your cut when you get a major injury? If you get a major injury, that means that you can't train a whole section of your body, you're going to burn less calories. And the sections of your body that you can't train as well because they're injured or connective tissue, you might have a partial tear, a minor injury that limits what you can do now. When you're in a calorie deficit, how fast do you think that muscle is going to shrink? That will absolutely interfere with the idea of both cutting, burning more calories, because again, it's going to be harder to burn calories with an injury. It's going to be harder to hold on to muscles in any area of your body that you've injured if you continue to try to lose body fat. Food reduction combined with not training equals muscle loss every time. So injury prevention becomes a big deal. And the same thing when it comes to overall fatigue. Guess what? You're going to have to pick and choose your battles. You know what? Because you can't go into every workout properly fed. You're going to have to simply accept things like, and this is what I have to do, which workout for me is the most important. What 1 or 2 days in the gym am I going to get in through my weekly schedule going to matter the most? I'm going to have to eat some extra carbs that night before I go do that. I'm going to have better pre-workout nutrition on those days because my overall energy turnover is lower, because I might be doing more cardio. I am doing more cardio, eating slightly less calories, doing a lot more cardio to lose body fat. Well, there is going to be factors on your training fuel. So picking what days you're going to need to backload a little bit, which days you're going to want to get the best pre-workout nutrition, maybe a little more food in, so that you can push through those sessions is going to become important. And the days in which you can't do that, because I promise you most of you are lifting more than 1 day a week, probably more than 2 days a week on your cut, those other days you're going to have to keep your ego in check. You're going to have to step back and say, wait a minute, I get my 1 or my 2 good workouts in every week. This other stuff needs to be rudimentary. It needs to be maintenance. I need to very much factor in that I'm on less food in this workout. I'm not going to be able to push myself very hard. Hard enough to hold on to the muscle I have. Hard enough to re-stimulate a little bit of muscle protein synthesis from that one good workout. Maybe that one workout every week that's the most important. You may be pushing relatively hard. The other days you're backing down. And you're going to have to accept that some days, due to the weight loss, the changes in leverages, reduced training fuel, that even sometimes those good days, they might be a little worse. You're going to need to learn to listen to your body and step back and say, okay, man, normally I can do 8 reps with that weight. That weight started getting real heavy at 6. Do I try to grind out 8? Or do I stop at 6 when I've got good technique still? Do I stop and say, okay, that's enough for it. I just need to hold on to my muscle mass and my strength, and those 6 reps on that set were enough to do that. Do I really need this 7th and 8th rep? They might help me grow, but I'm not eating enough to grow. I'm probably not eating enough to recover if I grind this set all the way out. Those are the things that you've got to start looking at. You've got to start looking at how much training volume can I actually handle before I start to under-recover. Because if I'm on reduced food, I'm not growing. Recovery is going to be tough. If I push too hard in any one given session, I'm going to overtrain easier. And if you start pushing and overreaching without sufficient calories to fuel the recovery of muscle growth, what happens? You start to regress a little bit. When you start to regress, your next workout after that's going to be even harder. The weights you normally use in the sets are going to be even more difficult. Then your strength regresses further. Then what happens? Strength starts regressing and you start losing a little bit of muscle. That can slow fat loss, can it? because that's going to affect metabolism. You start having shitty workouts, you're going to burn less calories. You start losing a little bit of muscle, your metabolism's going to go down a hair. It's not going to be a lot, but that starts to add up. You have to learn to keep your ego in check. You've got to learn to manage your workouts in bite-sized bits and to assess each workout and each day of how is this going to fit into my overall picture? How is this going to help me hold on to my muscle mass? How is this going to help me to hold on to my performance while I continue towards this goal of losing more body fat? And you have to learn to accept that you can't go 100% all the time. You may not even be able to go 100% any of the time. You're going to have to be realistic with yourself. We all have to do that when we have different goals, and that goal is losing body fat. That if losing body fat is your goal, then you're going to have to accept that other goals might have to be slightly compromised to do that more effectively. And it doesn't mean that you need to lose the ground that you've had with other goals, but you do need to assess, wait a minute, if I time this wrong and I try to go too many directions at once and try to bite off too many chunks at the same time, something's going to give and it won't be what I get to pick. It's important that we look at that. It's important that we start assessing our recoverable fatigue and start asking ourselves when we're watching the scale go down and you're losing body fat, do I really need to push this to the limit? And if I push this exercise to the limit, is that going to affect my recovery over here? If I push those squats or those deadlifts too hard, am I going to be able to do the cardio to the extent that I want to do tomorrow to burn through more calories, to burn more fat? Or do I need to do just enough to keep my muscle mass and keep my strength so that I can still recover from it, so that I can have the mental drive to do the cardio that I need to do, the other things that I need to do to lose body fat? And it's a tricky juggling act. This stuff is a lot easier when you're overeating. When you're bulking and you're eating enormous amounts of calories so that the scale is going up and you're gaining muscle, recovery is a lot easier. Timing these things is a lot easier. Your margin for error is a lot higher. When you pull that surplus food out, it's a different ballgame. And we have to accept that our bodies are going to respond different, and you can't get caught up in that ego, that pride that says, no, I should be able to go just as hard on 3,000 calories as I was going on 3,800 2 months ago. In fact, I should be stronger. You've got to let that shit go. And you've got to accept, okay, that's not my goal. I've got to lose this body fat. I need to get this other goal so that I can go back to later improving on that one. You can't have it all at once. You can't have your cake and eat it too. Alright guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.